Been told that Judah's going to make sure that you can hear me. Otherwise, I would normally say, if you can't hear me, tell me. And if I'm talking too loudly, tell me. But it sounds like I think Judah's doing a good job, isn't he? I'm just trying to find the right chapter. I've been asked to talk about a parable, so I prayed about what parable to choose, and I felt that God did lead me to this one. I think in future meetings there are going to be people talking about other parables, Mike, is that right? Or is it just parables today? Oh, right. They are, yeah. So the parable, well, really it's two pictures, but they're in verses next to each other. In Matthew 13, if you wanted to look as I read it, it's in Matthew 13, starting at verse 44. If I get on the right page, that would be useful, wouldn't it? Yeah. Verse 44. So, again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. So we'll come on to those parables or pictures in a moment, but just some brief introductory remarks, because I understand from people who do this regularly that sometimes people switch off after 5 minutes or something and then tune back in when they think it's near the end. So in case you do tune out, I'm just going to say the two key words for my remarks are choice and value, which sounds like I'm going to talk about supermarkets, doesn't it? You know, like there's various supermarkets within our reach here. You can go to one and there's lots of choice. There's a whole wide range. You can have every herb that gets mentioned by the TV chefs, you know, all the latest stuff. But there's other places where you can go and get value. We go to the value one most of the time, don't we, Kath? But you can spend the same amount of money in the choice one and maybe get food for 2 days, or go to the choice one and get food for 2 weeks. But that's not what we're really talking about. I just wanted to get those words in your head, choice and value, because as we go on, hopefully we'll see that those are the two things really that come to us from these two pictures. Since this is the first one, and I believe other people are going to talk about parables, I thought perhaps it would be helpful if we just briefly say what a parable is. I've tried to look up scholars and expert people, you know, to guide me, and ask the Lord to guide me above all. But apparently a parable is an illustration. Sometimes we talk about analogies, don't we, to try to get across some truth or some meaning. And apparently it comes from two words that mean comparing, putting one thing next to another. So it's a picture or an illustration or a comparison. By the way, in the introductory remarks, I'm going to be referring to other verses apart from these as I talk about the parable. If anybody wants to be sure that they're in the Bible, I've got a list underneath my notes here, which you can take away with you. I think it's probably quicker to just mention them rather than ask us all to read them together, because otherwise it would be 3 hours, wouldn't it? So is that okay if I don't actually read them all, if I just say in such a place? Yeah. But if you want them, as I say, there's a list if you want to check whether I'm telling the truth or not. Okay. So when I've looked at these scholars and theologians, there's more than one way of looking at these two pictures that these verses give us. Going to be concentrating on one, really. And I think rather than what scholars say, maybe it's more helpful to us to think, what does Jesus tell us about what we're looking at? And the first thing maybe that strikes us is that he's telling us something about the kingdom of heaven, because he starts off saying the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure, and then the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. Yeah? So maybe we've all got an idea of what we think the kingdom of heaven means, but I thought it was worth maybe reminding ourselves what Jesus says about the kingdom of heaven. When we hear that phrase and when we hear the word heaven, then we could maybe at first think, oh, well, it's about the afterlife. We're on earth, heaven's out there, up there somewhere, and it's going to come. If we know Jesus, it's going to come at some point. But as we look at what Jesus says about the kingdom of heaven, it's not quite as simple as that. Jesus speaks about the kingdom of heaven as being in the here and the now. It tells us in Mark 1:15, he started to preach, it says, to the people in the area where he was, and say the kingdom of heaven is at hand. At hand means it's near, doesn't it? It means it's here. It means that we can reach it, we can experience it. So it's not something that's far off and, beyond the planets somewhere. Another thing that it tells us, and this is in Luke 17 and in other places as well, he says, don't do this, don't do that, thinking that you'll get into the kingdom of heaven, because the kingdom of heaven is within you. Yeah? So that's not on some other planet, is it, or on some cloud. If it's within us, it's near to us. So when we look at other places where Jesus speaks about the kingdom of heaven, we can see that he's talking about a spiritual reality which can impact us and which we can connect with. There's verses in Luke 11 and Matthew 12 where Jesus is trying to reply to people who are criticizing him for casting out demons from people. And he says, in one place he says, by the finger of God cast out demons, the kingdom of heaven has come upon you. And then in another place he says, if I, by the Spirit of God, cast out demons, then the kingdom of heaven has come upon you. So when I look at that, what it seems to be saying to me is that Jesus is saying there's a spiritual reality. If he's talking about the kingdom of heaven coming upon them, and he says it's by the Spirit of God, then he's talking about a spiritual reality. A very important thing that he tells us about the kingdom of heaven is he says in John 3, a lot of us are familiar with John chapter 3, about being born again, and one of the important things that he tells us in that chapter is that nobody can see the kingdom of heaven unless they're born again. So it doesn't say you can't see the kingdom of heaven unless you wait until you die and then say, Lord, please can I come to heaven? He says you can see the kingdom of heaven by being born again. As I say, when he started his ministry on the earth, that was what he started off by saying, telling them that the kingdom of heaven was at hand. But when he sent his disciples out to tell them to preach, what did he tell them to preach? He told them to preach, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He gave them the same message. So again, it wasn't something for time still to come. It was something now. As far as time to come and far away and long time away from us, one thing about the kingdom of heaven that is further away is that there will come a time, we know this from Revelation 21 and from 1 Corinthians 15, there will come a time when, although a lot of people in the earth, hopefully more and more, experience the reality of the kingdom of heaven here in the here and now, there will be a time when God will be king, not just on the earth, but heaven and earth, it says in Revelation, will join together. And God, the Lord, Jesus, will be king over all the material reality and all the spiritual reality that there is anywhere in the universe. 1 Corinthians 15 says that everything in this process of time since Jesus went back to his Father, everything that's going on, there's a process of everything being brought under the feet of Jesus, with him as the Lord and the King over everything. But that eventually when he's brought everything under his kingship, he'll present everything to the Father, and there won't be anything that isn't under the rule of Jesus. Have the 3 hours gone by yet, Mike? All right. Right, so that's really introduction and just a bit about the kingdom of heaven, because a lot of the parables, I suspect, if other people come and talk about parables, there'll be parables that are talking about the kingdom of heaven, where Jesus is trying to explain to us what he means about the kingdom of heaven. So I hope that that will be helpful and maybe save other people a bit of time. So the first of these pictures, it sounds like at some point somebody has buried some treasure in this field. I suppose it could be, I don't know if they had archaeological digs in the Holy Land at the time that Jesus was ministering for those 3 years, but when we think of treasure being found in a field, perhaps we think of these archaeological digs. Somebody finds some Anglo-Saxon coins or Roman coins or weapons or something. Whatever it was, this person found the treasure in the field. The field didn't belong to them. They were working, I think, in the field, that's all I can imagine, Why would they be digging? You know, maybe they were working in somebody else's field. Maybe they were ploughing the field and they find this treasure in some part of the field. And so that somebody else doesn't take it away, they hide it again. There's that little bit there, isn't it? It says he hid it. The treasure was hidden in the field. He found it and then he hid it again because probably didn't want somebody else to come and take it away. So he hides it and then goes and tries to organise to buy the field. So whoever had hidden the treasure there, if it was deliberately hidden there, maybe that person had died or it was forgotten about, and then it gets discovered by this other person. So they bury it there and they go away, they sell everything that they have to go and buy that field. So keep those two words in the back of your mind, choice and value. Yeah? Obviously this person looked at this treasure and thought, this is valuable, and I think I would like to have this valuable treasure. Yeah? In the second picture, we see it's a merchant who, as a regular thing, seems to go around looking for pearls to buy, and in this particular instance, comes across a pearl that's more valuable than any other pearl that they've ever bought, more valuable than all the other pearls put together, so decides again to sell everything so that they're able to buy that much more valuable pearl. So two pictures, and there are similarities. I'm suggesting there are three things that the two pictures have in common. One thing, both pictures tell a story about someone who sold all that they had. Yeah? Secondly, they both tell a story about someone who puts such a high value on an object that they were willing to give all they had or all that they could do in order to get it. And the third thing, they chose to do that. So they've got those three things in common, and those three things include my two key words, value and choice. They saw something that they thought was valuable, and they chose to go about getting it if they could. Now, different people value different things. Sometimes Kathy and I watch, these TV programs like Flog It, Bargain Hunt, Antiques Roadshow. And I think I don't know whether Kathy shares this or has some other interest in the program, but my main enjoyment when I'm watching those programs, or my main interest, is to see the things that people are prepared to pay a lot of money for and think, why on earth would somebody buy that object? Bargain Hunt was on yesterday and I was watching it, and this is like two teams of people go off to buy, I think it's supposed to be antiques, and then they put up for auction and see if they can make a profit through the sale of the things that they've chosen. And there was one of these teams yesterday, and as so often when I'm watching it, I couldn't believe my eyes. They saw this leather stool that was in the shape of a bulldog. Try to imagine that. I was looking at it on the TV screen and thinking, why are you picking that object? And who on earth do you think would ever want a leather bulldog that they can use as a stool in their front room? But anyway, they thought that it was valuable. And I thought, this is never going to sell. When it comes to the time of the auction, this leather bulldog is not going to sell. They paid £62 for this leather bulldog. And I was waiting for, will there be any bids? Amazingly, there were bids. There were people bidding for this leather bulldog. And they paid £62 for it. And they actually got somebody to buy it for £60. So they only made £2 loss on it. But it just underlined to me, the things that somebody else thinks are valuable that you wouldn't give house room. So this question of value is a very individual thing, isn't it? What do people value, and what choices are they prepared to make on the basis of what they value? It comes into other things as well, doesn't it? I really love Frangipan. I like the Frangipan in the Mission Cafe, and I can recommend it highly. 4 years ago, I had a major problem with my heart, and they've been sort of trying to sort me out ever since then. So when I go into the Mission Cafe and see the Frangipan piled up, left to myself, because of the value that I put on Frangipan, I could probably say, give me 5 pieces of Frangipan, and I will make short work of them, because it's such a pleasure that I value so highly. But I also value my health, so in that moment I have to make a choice. I really value the Frangipan. I love the frangipane, but I value my health. And if I eat too much frangipane, it's going to make more work for my heart carrying around extra weight that I shouldn't be carrying. So we make these choices on the basis of the value. Okay. Now, issues of what we value and the choices we make on the basis of what we value isn't just about objects. Obviously, it is about objects, some of them very strange, like the leather bulldog, but it's about other things as well. It can be about things like position, pleasures, money, reputation. When I think about position, I'm retired now, but I think back to my career, and there were many times in my career when I had colleagues who were desperate for some position. I was quite happy to be drawing my salary and knowing that I was contributing to the pension scheme, that when I get out of here, you know, I can have some sort of income when I've finished doing what I'm doing. But there were people that and didn't make any secrets about it. It was like they wanted to go the next rung up the ladder. Some of them wanted to be on the top of the ladder, and they would do anything and make all sorts of choices to be able to progress up that ladder. And as a Christian, I look at it and I think, well, you obviously don't realise how insignificant your ladder is in the scheme of things. You know, they seem to see it as like, this is the most important thing. And when I'm at the top of that ladder, I'm going to be so important and be powerful. And, you know, think, well, actually, it's not a very significant ladder, but it seems to be important to you. You're valuing it very highly. We don't need to go into detail about pleasures because all of us are very prone to doing things that are pleasurable, aren't we? You know, like me with cake. I don't know. We're not going to ask. Everybody's got different ideas of what's pleasurable. Some people get very taken up with money and trying to acquire more money. A lot of people are sensitive about their reputation, and that's very important to them. But there's various places in the Bible where all of these things that we can value are put in a different light. So I'll just quickly go through some of them. In Ecclesiastes 6, the writer of Ecclesiastes says to us, all the labour of man is for his mouth. In other words, people are working hard to feed themselves. And then it says, yet his soul is not satisfied. Obviously, we eat to stay alive. But it's saying you can work very hard to achieve different things, but if your soul isn't satisfied, then it isn't actually worth the value that you're placing on it. In Philippians 3, it talks about people who set their minds on earthly things, and it says the end of that person is destruction. If all that you're thinking about in the world and in your life is earthly things, then the Bible's telling us then you're in danger of actually destruction. In Romans 2, it talks to us about people that value praise from men, but not from God, and the different value there is. How much more valuable if God, for some reason, would praise us or be pleased with us or honour us compared to just living for honour and praise from other human beings. Of course, there's a famous verse in Matthew 13 where it tells us riches, if money is the thing that people value most in their life, it tells us in that chapter that riches are deceitful. It talks about the deceitfulness of riches because it can make people think, oh, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be satisfied, I'm going to be fulfilled, everything's going to be fine if only I have more money. But then I see sometimes articles in the paper or listen to people on the television who've been famous and rich, and you look at them and you think, oh, they've got everything. Only the other day I saw somebody, I think it was the guy that's just recently died that was in Friends, was saying this, that actually people think fame and wealth is going to be wonderful, but if they knew what it was like when you've got it, he was saying actually it doesn't guarantee you a happy life. So these things can be deceitful. And then the story Jesus tells in Luke 12, he says about this man, he's built more barns, he's acquired more goods and more wealth, and he said, I'm going to build bigger barns, and I've got so much stuff now, I need a bigger place to store all the stuff that I've got. And then God says to him, you're very foolish, because tonight I'm going to require your soul. And then, when your life ends, which it's going to do tonight, whose will those things be? Who will they belong to? You're so happy that you've got mountains of stuff and you need bigger places to store them. But who will they belong to when you're gone? We've got that famous phrase, haven't we, that you can't take it with you, is the famous phrase, isn't it? Yeah. So when we're offered are we still within the 3 hours, Mike? Are we all right? Yeah. So when we're offered a choice between knowing the spiritual reality that we find through knowing Jesus as our Saviour and Lord, do we place a higher value on all those things that we've just listed? Yeah, we've got that, again, a choice, and choice that's based on value. I could go through all of that list: position, reputation, power, wealth, all those different things. Do I place a higher value on any of those things than I place on the reality of knowing Jesus as King of my life and as my Saviour? One thing that I left off the list, but I just talk about briefly, is identity. Because I think in our modern world, more than, I'm quite old now, but when I was younger, I don't think it was as much of a thing. But these days, it seems to be a bigger thing, the question of identity or finding yourself. Everywhere you look, people are being encouraged to pursue their dreams, find themselves, be you, have me time. Because I'm old, I don't know all the phrases, but do you get what I'm talking about? There's a lot of this, the important thing is that you should find yourself, be yourself, and be fulfilled in yourself. But the ironic thing is that because our identity, this is what we learn from the Bible, our identity is in your human spirit. It's not in any of those things. It's not in having a position. It's not in having more wealth. It's not in having more pleasures. But your identity, who you really are, is actually in your human spirit. And how do we fulfill that? How do we find that? How do we connect with that? The paradoxical thing is, Jesus says, he that wants to find his life must lose it. So it's by giving my life away to Jesus and saying, here you are, you be Lord of my life. My life's going to belong to you now. I'm not going to be in charge of my life now. I'm going to submit everything to you. And I'm going to connect with that spiritual reality. That's really part of the process of being born again, isn't it? And remember, we just said a few minutes ago that Jesus says in John 3, unless a man is born again, he can't see the kingdom of heaven. So if I want to find myself, if I want to be fulfilled, if I want to discover my identity, the way to do it is giving my life away to Jesus and connecting with that spiritual reality that he's talking about when he talks about the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. People can spend a lot of time, money, and energy on trying to find themselves, and I'm speaking from experience. You could talk to my long-suffering wife, and she will tell you how many courses I've done, how many qualifications I've got, how much effort I've put into, until coming to the point of, well, actually, I've done all of this, but what good has it done me? It kept me employed for some time, but what good does it actually do me to pursue all of those and to invest so much time in all of those things? Right. Making progress. Yeah. So God asks us to choose. What will we surrender in order to know the kingdom of heaven in our lives? Yeah. What we choose will depend upon what we value. That's what I'm trying to say, really. So, one of the wonderful things about giving our life to God and letting him be the king of our life is that, in contrast to worrying about all those things, am I going to be able to acquire enough? Am I going to have importance, value? Am I going to have an important position? Am I going to have fulfillment? To be satisfied, to be fulfilled, to be fed even on very basic levels, because all of that comes from him. And it says, if I can find the place on the paper here, yes, in Romans 8:32, it says, he that delivered his own son for us, didn't spare his own son, he gave him up for us, how will he not with him also freely give us all things. So if I give my life to Jesus, if I let him be in charge of my life, then part of that means that I'm able to trust him that he will provide what is needed in my life, that he will make sure that I'm fulfilled. Yeah? Now, I looked at these scholars and these theologians, and some of them, and like going back to, did somebody mention Jerome this morning? Was it you that mentioned Jerome? Going back to all those people from the early church, some of them say, no, it's not about a person being asked to choose whether to be a Christian or not, whether to choose asking Jesus to be their Saviour. It's not about that. It's from the other point of view. Well, I'm not a scholar, and so I can't give an authoritative answer on that. But I know that sometimes God speaks to me through both possibilities. Sometimes when I'm looking at it, God's challenging me, saying, what are you prepared to surrender? Is there something that's coming in between my relationship with you? Is there something that's a blockage, an obstacle between us? And then finding that if you surrender, whatever that is, then it's a blessing in your relationship with God. And you get to know him better. But also God speaks to me the other way around about it, to say, there was somebody who found a treasure hidden in a field, and they sold everything that they had to go and buy the field so that they could own the treasure. And sometimes he speaks to us the other way around, doesn't he, and say, I'm the one that bought the treasure. You're bought with a price. He gave everything that he could, gave everything that he had. He left his home in heaven. He lived not a luxurious life. He submitted to his parents. He worked hard. He suffered. He gave his life. He surrendered his fellowship with his Father in heaven, as we know, during the crucifixion, when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He allowed God to turn his back on him so that we don't have to be forsaken. He bought the treasure. He looks at the people that he made. God so loved the world. He looks at you and he looks at me and he looks at every human being. He looks at every Palestinian, I have to say, and he looks at every Israelite, or Israeli we should say these days. He looks at every Arab Israeli. He looks at the Arab Christians that are citizens of Israel. I didn't plan to say this, but I find myself saying this. He looks at each one, whichever of those territories he lives in, and he looks at every person in Windermere and in our country and says, I was willing to pay the price, bought with a price, and all you have to do is to accept. So that's another perspective on it, that it's not us deciding whether we're going to buy the treasure and what price we're prepared to pay to get the treasure of knowing Jesus, but the other perspective on it, that he was prepared to pay an incredible price to have a relationship with us and for us to be able to know the kingdom of heaven. And yet a third way of looking at this is going back to the pearl. My mind's just gone a blank, excuse me. That sometimes as Christians, we look at ourselves, we look at our lives, we don't see the pearls. We don't see the pearls that we've already acquired, the things that are precious, the things that are of value, the things that are priceless. We look at all the negative things. Or maybe it's just me. Is it just me? Nobody's nodding, so I'll just assume it's just me. Sometimes we just look at the negative things. But then sometimes God says to me, if it doesn't happen to you, then you don't need him to say this to you. But sometimes God says to me, I bought the whole field. I didn't just buy what you think are the good bits. I didn't just buy the bits that you think are the treasure, the valuable bits. I bought the whole field. So sometimes I look at my life and I think, this field is just like a sea of mud. Who could do anything with this field? Or I look at it and I think, the soil in this field is not very fertile. first time we visited Argentina when our Sarah lived there, there was a guy, the father of the family that she stayed with, who was talking to me about Argentina, and he said, you can grow anything in this country. And he was giving me examples of the different grapes that can grow there, and so they can make different types of wine, and different crops that do really well. He said it's because of the soil. The soil is really fertile in this country. It's really good soil. You can grow anything. But sometimes maybe we look at the soil of our field and we think, oh, it's a bit poor, this soil, really. What good can happen here? What can God do here? But there's a treasure in the field. You can look at maybe 99% of the field doesn't seem worth anything, but in 1% of the area of that field there's a treasure. And God says to us, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. And at times like that, for me, again, nobody's nodding at me, but for me anyway, it's like God comes along and says, you just see the earthen vessel, but for me there's a treasure there. And don't just focus on the negative. I've completely lost my place in these notes. So just drawing to a close then, what will we choose? As I said before, the choices that we make will depend upon what we value. But sometimes God's confronting us and he's saying, I want you to make a choice. Maybe you want to go further with me. Maybe you want your relationship with me to develop. Maybe you want to feel that you're closer to me. And he says, well, then choose. If this X, Y, or Z is something that's standing in the way of that, then choose. Either you want to know me better or you want the frangipane. just to give it a name. Could be anything, couldn't it? Could be all sorts of things. Yeah. So Jesus offers the reality of the kingdom of heaven. If I admit that I'm a sinner, for those that don't consider themselves Christians, if there is anybody here, by admitting that I'm a sinner, by asking him to forgive me and to cleanse me, asking to be born again and receiving him as my Saviour and as the person in charge of my life, then I can know that reality. And if you're already a Christian before today, if he asks something of you that you've never given before, think about the question of value. What do I value? And what will be valuable to me, apart from what's valuable to him? What will be more valuable for me, to go this way with God or to carry on as I was? And so we make the choices depending on what we value. And if we look at the field and think, it's not a very good field, it's just a load of mud, it's just a load of infertile soil, just stop for a moment and think, what does God say? He talks to me about the treasure and says there's treasure in the earthen vessel, and somewhere in the field there's a pearl of great price. And change our thinking then on the basis of that and say, it's not proud, it's not arrogant of me to say, something in me is of value to God. And then I can go on with him. Was that 3 hours? 4.5. 4.5, right. Okay. You're welcome. God bless you. Yeah.